What's up, everyone? Alex here, and welcome to my little corner of the internet. I wanted to talk about something that I realized a lot of people resonate with. I had posted this on the YB3 blog, and it's about having pretty much two different separate gender experiences, and not being bigender, but living in two different worlds. Living as your outward gender versus your inward gender. And I kind of like this as a concept. I might go more into it another time because I think there's a discussion to be had about something like this. So it's basically like my outward gender is the gender that I am out as, that I am kind of not performing as. It kind of is performative, but just the gender I am most comfortable being out as, and like what people in my day-to-day life know me as, versus my inward gender, meaning my actual gender experience, my actual gender, and like how I navigate that in spaces where like it's safe to talk about such a thing, to be openly this gender. So I feel like a lot of trans people have this experience, and it's interesting because for me, my outward gender and my inward gender, they're not inaccurate. Like none of them are inaccurate. My outward gender is not like I have to be this gender, but I'm not really this gender. It's just who I have to pretend to be so that I can avoid violence and harassment from other people. My outward gender is man. I am a guy, and for some people that's not the case. I know a lot of people, like, they don't have access to transitioning. They don't have a safe place where they can come out as trans, so their outward gender is not their actual gender. It's just who they kind of have to pretend to be. And this is specifically my own experience with, kind of being out as the more socially acceptable gender, but then like my inward gender is kind of the like nobody really knows about this unless they like really know me kind of thing. So that's what I am talking about here. Having the outward gender, like I am a man, that's how everyone knows me as. I don't have to introduce myself as a man to people. I just am. I pass as a man in my day-to-day life. That's how I'm seen at work, at school, just every day on the bus, every day when I like do my shopping, and that's just how people understand me to be. And it's kind of a, not subtle, it's kind of a like casual experience where I am just existing, and that's just the gender that I am. And I want to note that I've always talked about how like masculinity is not like an intrinsic part of my identity. I like being read as masculine when it comes to outward gender, when it comes to like how people understand me as a man in my day-to-day life. Being read as masculine means safety. It means that people are reading me as male, socially male, and that's kind of giving me almost a privilege of, I am safely able to be seen as a man and navigate male spaces. I'm not the most masculine person, but it's validating when I am seen as masculine in my day-to-day life. It's interesting because masculinity, when it comes to my like more complex gender experiences, masculinity just isn't, it doesn't really play a part, not in a binary way, but I'm seen binarily masculine in everyday life. So it's an interesting, not contrast, but it's an interesting kind of two different ways I'm navigating masculinity depending on whether I'm like out, or if I'm like, in spaces where I can talk more about being multigender, being non-binary, and all that. I do not talk about being non-binary openly in my day-to-day life unless it's in very specific spaces typically meant for that. Rarely it could come up at work. I'm working in a different place now. I'm not working at the coffee shop that I used to work at, so there's less of a queer lean and definitely less of a left lean in the like where I'm working, and it's like all the guys work in the kitchen, and all of the I wanted to say girls because I said guys. All the men work in the kitchen, all the women work front of house, and there's this weird ass dichotomy. It's a weird space to be working. I switched to this job because there's more pay. Otherwise, it's marginally less accepting. I don't know. It's definitely an experience having to work with a bunch of like dude bros. But like, working at the coffee shop, I probably could have been a little more open about being non-binary in a space like that. I mean, we had multiple people who used they, them pronouns working for that coffee shop. So, like, there was a nice, like, I could be open if the topic came up kind of thing. I still, outwardly being a man and not really anything else, because that's, like, just the easiest. If I tried to openly be all of these other things, even if that is authentic, I feel like that kind of leaves room for harassment at worst, invalidation, misgendering, otherwise. Like, it's not something I want to bother dealing with. In an ideal world, sure, like, I could just openly be me. In an ideal world, I don't think I would. I think my gender would be a little different anyway, but that's a whole other thing. But I dress mostly masculine, kind of in a casual way. I don't know how to dress like properly masculine. I don't know where the line is between like masculine and like leaning more neutral. I don't know where that line is, but like nothing clocks me as other. I dress as a man, present as a man. My focus on malehood for my outward gender is just the ability to pass. And there's less of a focus on an abundance of labels or specific labels. I kind of throw that all out in my like everyday life because it's just safer if I don't. So there's this part of me, and then there's the inward gender where specific online spaces, well, most online spaces for me, specific queer spaces in person, certain people in my life, I'm out in those areas as my most authentic self. So openly bigender, openly transmaverin. I would be considered transmasculine in spaces that knew I was a transgender man. That's just like how like people would understand me to be, but transmaverin would be the most accurate for me, being an unambiguous, autonomous transgender experience. And then I mentioned before, masculinity is not really like a defining factor of my gender. I don't consider my genders masculine. Even my malehood, I do not consider to be masculine. As far as presentation goes, on top of all that, I talk about neutrality. I have a very interesting relationship with neutrality. I use it as a way to talk about my gender presentation and to talk about, like, I experienced kind of a soft mask sort of, like, gender presentation, and like I call that like neutral mask, or like neutral leaning mask, things like that, where like I'm not leaning feminine and I'm not going androgynous, but like kind of the other direction, sort of the fourth point in all of that, where like you have like masculine, feminine, androgynous, and then neutral's like the other one that kind of like ties it all together. That's sort of where I'm at. And one of my genders is neutral. It's aporigender. But that's the interesting thing, is that specifically aporigender is supposed to be strongly gendered. But neutrality is seen as an aberrant quality, which is, I would not say neutrality is a strongly gendered quality. So I want to do more exploration. I don't think aporigender was allowed to breathe when it was first coined. I don't think it was allowed to like expand into these like different aspects and like really explored by the queer community. So I don't know what the overall view is of that strongly gendered part. I can't find the original coining post. I can only find a post that says like aporigender was something I coined and it means this, which is like fine, but I need like the original. I want to see like the exact wording, not like a rewording, even if it's a copy paste. I want to see like where it was at the time, because I think it was defined a little bit differently and in a way that wasn't exactly great. Like I think it accidentally like excluded some people, or seemed like a little insensitive when it was coined, and then it got expanded upon, and now it like is its own identity with its own unique quality of aberrant, which can describe things like maverick. But neutral genders falling under aporigender is so interesting to me. I'm going to put that question out there. I'm going to have to do it on the YB3 blog because my main doesn't get any traction, so I'm going to ask the community about that. Anyway, neutrality for me is not strongly gendered. My presentation's not strongly gendered. The neutral aspect of my identity kind of softens the male aspect of my identity. So, like, that's why I still, for the most part, call myself a demi guy. Less and less nowadays. I don't know where I'm at. I literally have a flag. I literally have... Oh, you won't be able to see it. Because I've rearranged things, but there's a third flag. You can barely see the non-binary flag behind my shelf, but there's also a demi boy flag still on the wall. It's in the same spot it was when it was behind the couch, but now the shelf is there. And like I still relate to the demi guy experience. I still see myself as like mostly male, which is so interesting to navigate now. Like, I don't know, I'll probably put out my, like, 13th video on neutrality and what it means to me. I'd actually love to see how many videos go into neutrality, or even, neutroy, when I was identifying as neutroy. Oh, man. There's so much to be said about neutrality. Like, I don't know what my relationship is with it, but my goodness. My genders have a lot of complexity to them, and I'm constantly exploring and reevaluating them, as you can see. So this is all part of the inward gender experience, where there's constantly new ideas being discovered, and I'm always poking around at all the little intricacies of everything that's going on in here. Whereas, like, my outward gender doesn't change. It's just guy. I'm just a guy, and that's how a lot of people, most people see me. I do get misgendered if they only hear my voice. It doesn't help that I have a unisex name, but that's my fault for choosing that. I just thought it sounded cool, and I could see myself, like, I could see it being a fitting name for me, so I just went with it. It's a whole thing, but I use a dozen or more labels to describe my inward gender, whereas like my outward gender, not so much. Maybe non-binary man, but just man for the most part, and trans. I will outwardly, I will openly be transgender, of course. Like I'll talk about it when it's okay to do so. I've come out as trans at most of my jobs because sometimes it just comes up, like the topic of gender comes up every so often. So I'll be like, oh, hey, yeah, like, by the way. Some people pick up on it. Surprisingly, I had worked with somebody who was definitely cis, definitely straight, and he realized I was trans, and it was actually not the trans pride flag I had on my hat. It was the tattoo that I have, because I have the trans pride tattoo on my arm, and that was surprising to me because most people recognize a pride flag before they recognize a gender symbol, so I thought that was really interesting. I also wanted to I wanted to read the YB3 blog post that kind of started this topic, because I wanted to just read the original idea where I was like, this would be a cool video topic, actually. Pretty much a month ago, I had posted, I always feel stuck between my outward gender, the socially acceptable gender I am in my day-to-day life, and my inner gender, the genders I always discuss in detail openly in online spaces. Masculine is not something I call my gender. I especially don't use the term transmasculine, despite being a transgender man. But that word is very validating to me, and when people see me as masculine, I feel like I pass just fine and I'm seen as a man. But when I'm online, where I would normally talk about my transgender or non-binary experience, the masculine label feels restrictive and it sets up a lot of expectation. If I'm masculine or transmasculine, I feel like I have to look or perform a certain way or use certain labels. I prefer, if I'm going to use any sort of gender equality label, terms like apparent or maverin. Neutral as well, but I tend to use that to describe my traditionally mask-looking presentation. Sometimes we find ourselves having to navigate two different worlds, and it can get really complicated. And then a good number of people resonated with that. I try not to think about the lack of attention some of my posts get. I realize there are some key queer bloggers that, like, some of their posts get kind of the same views as well. Like, if you're in a really niche queer space, you're not going to get a lot of eyeballs on posts like that. I mean, that was what I had posted a month ago, and then I had very quickly written it into the schedule as a potential topic. I thought it would be really cool to talk about something I would assume a lot of people in the trans community experience, but don't really like think a lot about, especially if they've already come out, and particularly like non-binary folks, where it's like they have the gender that they're like openly being seen as, and they are like comfortable with that. They're comfortable with being this gender, but there's so much more under the surface that like they don't really get to talk about in everyday spaces because it's like not safe to do so, or just they're afraid like there'd be more confusion than anything. So that I thought was, I thought people could really relate to that. That is pretty much it. I am sorry for being kind of absent for the month of October. I had a lot going on, so I just like totally forgot. Like I just didn't keep up with YouTube stuff, but I'm gonna try to at least stick with the schedule till the end of the year. I really want to. Also, I'm afraid of these topics getting really stale. I'm afraid that like I'm gonna run out of things to talk about again, and it's gonna go back into like expanding to talk about like other people's experiences, because there's only so much I could say sometimes I'll revisit topics and I'll have a more nuanced view of the topic, or I've made new discoveries since then. That's been really helpful for like finding things to discuss, is revisiting something like, hey, what does masculinity mean for me? What does femininity mean for me? And then I can't remember if I actually recorded it, but I wanted to reevaluate, like, does femininity still matter to me? I talked about, does masculinity still matter to me? And that was more complicated than the first time I talked about it, like a couple of years ago. So things are changing, things are evolving, and that's kind of exciting because I do have a couple more things I can like cover where I talk about, having this gender experience years ago and like how I feel about it now. But yeah, that's pretty much it. I am signing off for now. See you later.